In a deadly terror attack at Israel's Allenby crossing, 2 Israeli soldiers were murdered, even as Israeli forces thwarted a rocket cell in Ramallah. At the UN and across Europe, momentum builds to reward Palestinian statehood, while commissions accuse Israel of genocide, and UNRWA is exposed for employing Hamas. At home, Netanyahu warns of economic isolation. Smotrich calls Gaza a real estate bonanza, and Israelis face a new year torn between despair and resilience. All of that and more on this episode of Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Easton, correspondent for JNS. I am in studio with Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS, and we are in the JNS Media Hub here in Jerusalem. Alex, you wrote an article this week on JNS.org, an opinion piece titled "Recognition of Palestinian Statehood at the UN is not just a failure of diplomacy." We know that this week at the UN General Assembly, more than a dozen countries are prepared to recognize a so-called Palestinian state, essentially rewarding Hamas for the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to understand that what's happening at the UN this week, this isn't just about Gaza, what Israel's doing inside Gaza. This isn't just a failure of diplomacy, which is what I wrote, because people have said, you know, if you have the greatest diplomat, supposedly in Benjamin Netanyahu, how can you have such a great diplomatic failure? But actually, this is a systemic failure, and the bricks were laid. The foundation was laid here to do exactly this at the right time, a long time ago. And that can go back all the way to 1975. Zionism equals racism at the United Nations. And this United Nations has passed more resolutions against Israel than against not just any other country, than against all other countries. You have UN agencies here that have permanent inquiries into what happens in Israel when you don't have that for any other country. Every single UN agency, whether that's UNRWA, as we'll talk about later, whether that's the Human Rights Council, with UNESCO, which deals with culture, they all have been working to undermine Israel. And it's not just at the United Nations. I mean, you have this boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which has been going for more than a decade. And people said, you know, this isn't so serious. You know, we can, it's fringe, it'll go away. You know, we know how to get people to invest in Israel. But now you hear people talking about boycotting Israel and arms embargoes. And then you talk about what's going on the university campuses, the Qataris, the Saudis, others, they've been investing in the campuses for decades. The Israel apartheid weeks on the university campuses started about 25 years ago when I was actually touring university campuses trying to bring people on programs in Israel. So there's a lot that's been going on here for years to lay the groundwork for exactly what's taking place now. And it's been a failure of decades to allow these situations to fester and to grow. And now we see that when we get attacked on October 7th and we have a resulting war, that the whole groundwork was laid actually to turn the tide on Israel diplomatically. And we're about to see that happen in the United Nations.
Is there anything Israel could do to rectify that situation? I mean, we talk about public diplomacy and all our efforts, whether it's on the diplomatic front or in terms of PR. What can Israel do a better job of?
Look, I mean, at this point, the situation is tough, you know, and we have lost out for not taking situations seriously. And the same thing happened in the physical battlefield. You know, we allowed Hamas to build. We knew that they were building tunnels. We allowed Qatari money to go in there. We pulled out of Gaza ourselves in 2005 so that the IDF couldn't operate in Gaza. And when you make mistake after mistake after mistake, at some point you have to pay for those mistakes. And we see that we're paying for these mistakes, and not just Israeli mistakes, by the way. I think that a lot of the blame here needs to go on to U.S. Jewish community that allowed what was happening on the university campuses in particular. And also they themselves been criticizing Israel for more than a decade, you know, saying we have to criticize Israel, we have to push for Palestinian statehood. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of blame to go around. Now, in terms of what can be done, I mean, the only thing you can do is win. You just have to win, and you have to be strong, and you have to be resolute. You also have to not cave to the pressure. You have to stand up to it. You have to make it appear as though you're not broken. by the diplomatic onslaught that Israel's dealing with. It's very hard to do, honestly, because there's part of the psyche of the Israeli which really wants to be liked and even loved by people around the world. And that's, at this point, that's not going to happen. So, you have to take like the strong approach, the self-confident approach, and to win the war, as we've done. The military gains in this war have been absolutely incredible. Be proud of it. See that there is an end to the tunnel with regard to Gaza, to make certain that Hamas is not going to come back. You have to stay resolute here, because if you give in at all, you're actually going to compound the situation.
If that wasn't enough, the UN is also accusing Israel of genocide. A new UN commission called the Independent International Commission says that the Israeli security forces were aware that their military operations since October the 7th would cause the deaths of so-called Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, to me, that sounds like a war. I mean, we were attacked on October the 7th. We went to war. But the UN is taking it to a different level. And officially, this commission is calling Israel genocidal.
And you think it's any coincidence that the commission finds that Israel is guilty of genocide just the week before the UN General Assembly, when you have Emmanuel Macron and others and 142 other countries about to put forward a pathway toward recognizing Palestinian statehood. Now, by the way, the International Court of Justice, which heard trials about Israeli genocide in Gaza, didn't actually conclusively rule that Israel was committing genocide. They ruled that Israel needs to take steps to ensure that it does not commit genocide in Gaza. Here, the International Court of Justice, and that was a disgrace that they even heard the case, but they didn't find that Israel was guilty of genocide, and they haven't found that. But here you have the UN saying, well, even if the International Court of Justice, which essentially works with us and for us, doesn't find Israel guilty of genocide, well, we can still do it ourselves, and we'll use that as the pretext for recognizing Palestinian statehood at the UN.
And at the same time, you have the UK and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying he may not even wait till the UNGA. He might wait until, at this point, President Trump goes back to America, and he might recognize a so-called Palestinian state even before getting to New York.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing that President Trump goes to the UK and Starmer wants to recognize Palestinian statehood, or recognize some pathway toward Palestinian statehood. He knows Trump doesn't want him to do that. So he says, okay, well, I'll just wait until he goes. And then as soon as he goes, then I'll make an announcement. And Starmer himself is actually not going to the UN to present there. So, he himself doesn't have to say it from the floor in New York City. But this is the problem. And I will tell you, like in Europe with Starmer and with Macron and with other countries, is that, the politics shifts in these countries. It was just a couple of years ago, you had conservative prime ministers in the UK. They messed up their own politics, and then the country turned liberal, but the country could turn back conservative. The same thing in France. Macron has been the president for many years. There's going to be an election soon. There could be a shifting of the tide in French politics, just as there's a shifting in the tide all across Europe, where you see that the nationalist entities are doing better than the continentalist or globalist entities of the left, which are ruling against Israel. So, right now, it does look bad, but at the same time, proclamations by Macron and Starmer are not going to make a Palestinian state inevitable. The United States is not behind Palestinian statehood. They would have been if Kamala Harris had become the president, so we have to recognize that. But meanwhile, under President Trump, the United States is not going to support Palestinian statehood. The Prime Minister of Israel has stated very conclusively, even up to this last week, saying that there is not going to be a Palestinian state. So meanwhile, as long as Israel and the United States are not on board, there's not going to be a Palestinian state. So these proclamations, they're painful, but they don't necessarily lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. What they do potentially lead to is arms embargoes of Israel. They could lead to economic sanctions, and that could be very painful. They led to we saw the arrest warrants put out for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, you should know, and I wrote about this in my column, that when the Prime Minister flies from Israel to the United States, that they are not flying over European countries, over their airspace. Because if for whatever reason the plane would have to land for emergency reasons or whatever, they can't land without the prime minister being arrested. That the likelihood is if the plane would touch down anywhere, except for a few places like in Hungary, he would be safe. But Hungary, United States, Israel, there's nowhere that the prime minister can land a plane. So now they're going to be flying a longer route where they'll take off, they'll fly over the Mediterranean. They won't touch any of these other countries' airspace. And because of that, because the plane has to take a longer route, they're actually not taking journalists on the plane. They're not taking many members of the prime minister's staff, which includes security. They all have to fly commercially to get to the United States out ahead of the visit because they want less weight on the plane, which increases essentially the distance that the fuel can take the plane. So, this is the situation that we have. It's not going to create a Palestinian state, but it does create a whole host of diplomatic difficulties and possibly economic difficulties for the state of Israel.
That's a crazy reality that Israel has to go through all of that. Our prime minister, I mean, the leaders of Iran, North Korea, all these other China, communist countries don't have to do what Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing just to get to New York. Absolutely insane. You mentioned French President Emmanuel Macron. He went on Israeli television, Channel 12, this past Thursday night, and he warned Israel that their military offensive in Gaza is destroying the country's credibility. I mean, if there was an October 7th style attack on France, what would France do about it? There's no doubt they would go full-on war with the goal of destroying their enemy. And the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu or any other leader wouldn't go on French television and criticize France for self-defense and trying to prevent another October 7th style massacre. So this is just insane.
Hard to know what France would do. To be honest, if they were attacked, I wouldn't give them so much credit for what they would be willing to do. I mean, you see all of Europe imploding from mass Muslim immigration, much of it illegal immigration. But Channel 12 inviting Macron on, there you see how the Israeli media is actually, part of the challenge that Netanyahu and his government face, that they bring on these voices that are against Israel. And on the one hand, you say this is a head of state. How can I not bring on Macron? I mean, that makes sense. I understand that. But, they want for all Israelis to hear the president of France. And Israelis, they want to be able to go to France. They want to be liked by France. They want to be liked by the UK. They always thought that the United States, UK, France, these are our best friends. And they see that their best friends are turning. And Channel 12, helping to spread the cheer, I guess, by bringing Macron on French TV, on Israeli TV rather, this week.
One other item about the UNRWA, we talked a few weeks ago about the fact that the Trump administration would not provide visas for the Palestinian Authority to travel to the UNRWA until they stopped their pay-to-slay program. Obviously, they did not put a halt on that program, so Mahmoud Abbas will not be traveling. Nevertheless, the UN voted overwhelmingly to pass a resolution allowing President of the PA, Mahmoud Abbas, to deliver his speech virtually at this week's gathering of world leaders in New York.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how Secretary of State Marco Rubio created American policy banning members of the Palestinian Authority from coming to this year's UN General Assembly, which, this is exactly the flip side of what Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu face if it was going to fly to Europe. So the United States, flipping the script, and the UN General Assembly says, hey, we've got a big screen up here. We'll just bring Abbas in on, you don't let him fly here, so we'll just bring him in by Zoom when he'll give his address. I mean, this is about the Palestinian statehood. That's what this UN General Assembly is about. So they find a way to let Abbas speak.
I'll never forget images of Yasser Arafat, I believe, had his gun in his holster on him, delivering a speech years ago at the UN. So no surprise that they're doing everything they can to allow the PA to speak. One last item here about the UN. This is no surprise, really. A new study by the Geneva-based NGO UN Watch has found that UNRWA knowingly employed Hamas terrorist leaders as principals and teachers in the schools, quote, turning classrooms into incubators of hate. No real surprise here, but it's good to get this information out. If people had any type of doubt in terms of the relationship between Hamas and UNRWA, UNRWA is Hamas. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, but it's just deeper than that. I mean, yes, you're 100% right that Hamas and UNRWA work together. I think I said it last week on the show that UNRWA was a front group for Hamas, under the banner of the United Nations, and that's why this UN is about to try to recognize Palestinian statehood. But here you understand that Hamas has been controlling the schools, okay? And this is not just in the Gaza Strip, because UNRWA also controls schools in Judea and Samaria.
And in Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens is that they are inciting the kids. So, there's this whole question that comes up, and, Macron was saying on Israeli TV, that the Gaza city operation is counterproductive and this and that. And they always talk about innocent Palestinian civilians dying as a result of Israeli actions. These are people that went to UNRWA schools. They have been trained by Hamas. If Hamas is the principal or the teacher of the school, the UNRWA school, these people have been taught to incite, been incited to terror against Jews and Israel. Okay, it comes in the math books. It comes in the literature that they read. I mean, it's just pervasive. This is a society that, I believe that all children are born innocent, and they're beautiful, innocent minds, and they have the ability to be trained up, or they have the ability to be incited to terror. When you have Hamas teaching in the schools and then using the schools as military bases, the entire society becomes corrupted. And this is the problem with the Palestinian Authority. This is the problem with the Palestinian people. The civilians have been victimized by Hamas, and at a certain point, you have to turn around and say, what is this concept of the innocent civilian? There are definitely Palestinians that don't want to kill Jews. There are definitely Palestinians that feel that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have just been corrupt and have brought a world of hurt onto their society. But they actually have to do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to reach these conclusions, because a lot of these kids, they grew up watching Hamas Mickey Mouse that became a martyr suicide bomber on the last episode, or went to school, hearing a word problem, a math problem rather, about, if you have 10 Jews and 5 are dead, how you kill 5, how many Jews are left? And that's math. So, what's Israel supposed to do in this situation?
I want to stress that point just to make sure people understand this. We're sitting here in the JNS studio, and if you look at this map behind us, it takes like 7 minutes to get to this area over here. That's about it. And in these schools, 7 minutes from where we're sitting, that is where UNRWA operates. And as we just talked about, Hamas principals and teachers in these schools, right just 7 minutes in by car from where we're sitting here.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I also have kids that went to school and go to school currently in the old city, more like right over here, okay? And they sing songs about peace, okay? They don't like war. They're not being taught how great it is, what's going on in the Gaza Strip, okay? They're literally taught about God and warmth and holidays and peace. And that's the difference between our two societies. I mean, we have two societies that have totally different viewpoints about, what the present and the future should look like. And one side wants the other side dead. And the other side, well, they know that the other side wants them dead. And so they don't like the other side either, right? So this is the problem that we have. And we've constantly been kicking the can down the road on this problem. And it's coming to a head now in Gaza, and we'll see, how this problem eventually bubbles over in Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem, and other parts of Israel.
Sticking with Gaza, we've talked the last couple of weeks, IDF is launched the Gaza city operation, calling out more troops, diverting troops to Gaza this week. I think it's over 400,000 Arabs have left Gaza City. And then you had Bezalel Smotrich, Minister of Finance, who's also a minister in the Defense Ministry, talking about the day after. And he said the Gaza Strip was a potential real estate bonanza. I think this was at the Arut Sheva conference, if I'm not mistaken. And he was in talks with the United States on how to divide up the coastal enclave after the war, making clear his desire to transform Gaza into Israeli territory. So partially, he's going with the Trump plan of Arab immigration, turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, but he's insisting that Israel ultimately retain control over Gaza.
Well, we see that Israel is really demolishing most of the Gaza Strip, and even now, they had sought to avoid Gaza City. They recognize that they can't, because that's where Hamas is now, using as its central base of operations. That's probably where most of the hostages are, and so Israel's demolishing the tall buildings there. And at some point, we have to understand, like, what's going to happen with this territory. The population is still there. We're waiting to see if any country in the world will be willing to take in Gazan refugees. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary in just a couple weeks of October 7th. And, I saw a statistic that maybe 140,000 Gazans have left somehow or another since the beginning of the war. That's a very small percentage of the overall population. The majority of Gazans have not been afforded the opportunity to leave if that's what they want to do. And so you have to wonder, like, what's going to happen then, and who's going to rebuild Gaza? Are the Palestinians going to, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but let's say it takes 10 years. Are the Palestinians going to get some newly planned, built, wonderful Riviera on the Mediterranean that was built by Israel and the international community for them to, be essentially rewarded? Okay, yeah, we came in, we destroyed what you had, which wasn't so nice, and now we're going to build something much nicer for you? Or are they going to lose their territory? Are they going to lose sovereign control of that territory at least? Are some Gazans, like a meaningful number, going to leave? Is Israel going to be in control? And who's going to own the property? And certainly when you heard President Trump back in February, ruminate with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the White House about all of the Gazans leaving and the United States taking over the Gaza Strip, Trump's thinking about the real estate opportunity there. He's saying this is beachfront property.
Right.
And so the United States, he said, or I don't know if that's the U.S.'s government or whether that's private U.S. businesses, but this, Witkoff, he's a real estate guy. Trump's a real estate guy. Kushner's involved in a lot of real estate. They're probably thinking, like, okay, we're going to get in, we're going to build buildings, high-risers, hotels, whatever it is. And so obviously there are high-level discussions taking place between Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and his counterparts in the United States. And again, we don't know what the day after, like the Prime Minister, he said that he was asked, and he says all we know is that total victory. That's the only thing that he's been saying, but he hasn't been discussing what the day after is going to look like. And I don't know if anybody knows at this point what the day after is going to look like. But meanwhile, Israel's created a demolition zone, and there is an opportunity for real estate at the end of it. Who controls it? Who lives there? Remains to be seen.
Absolutely, Alex. This past Thursday was another very difficult day here in Israel. You had 4 Israeli soldiers killed in southern Gaza after their position was attacked by Hamas in some sort of explosive device, killing 4 soldiers. And then you had 2 other soldiers, reservists, who were killed at the Allenby crossing. That's between Israel and Jordan. And it turns out that the perpetrator of that attack was actually a Jordanian humanitarian aid truck driver. He was supposed to be bringing his wares from Jordan, delivering them to Gaza. And apparently before he was checked by the Israeli security forces, he got out of his truck, started shooting up the border crossing, and then had a knife and finished up, unfortunately, stabbing 2 Israeli soldiers to death, including a 68-year-old officer in the civil administration. His name is Yitzhak Harush, and a 20-year-old, his name is Oran Hershko. May God avenge their blood. 2 of them killed, an officer there killed at the Jordanian-Israel border.
Well, you have a few things wrong with this whole scenario. Number one is that there's an agreement whereby humanitarian aid coming in from Jordan to Israel is those trucks aren't checked by Israel. Okay, so these are essentially smuggling trucks. Okay, and there's been tons and tons, even hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid trucks that have gone from Jordan into Gaza that Israel does not check the contents of those trucks, and that's by some kind of agreement. I don't know how Israel agrees to that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But they did agree to that. Now, I don't know what the check was going to be over here in this case. I don't know if it was just like checking the paperwork, as checking the driver. But here you have a driver that is using a humanitarian aid truck Like, what's the purpose of his visit? It's supposed to be providing humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians, but he's a terrorist, okay? And I think that tells you everything that you need to know about this entire situation. Humanitarian aid, this is controlled by terrorists. The humanitarian aid, this is smuggling for potentially rifles and other things coming through, into the Gaza Strip. They claim, despite all the humanitarian aid, that there is starvation. They claim that when people die as a result of the war, as a result of Hamas using human shields, that Israel's committing a genocide. The UNRWA lets Hamas control the schools. Are you seeing a pattern develop? Okay, the whole thing has been laid as a giant trap. It's all been a booby trap for Israel to come in and to fight the war. There's no area where Israel actually works in good faith with Palestinians, with other countries in the Arab world. Qatar is representing the Hamas in dealing with the hostages, while the Hamas leaders are billionaires inside Qatar, living in the fanciest hotels, making so much money. How are they doing that? The whole thing is a corrupt booby trap for Israel, and you just see it manifest itself in every various area.
Yeah, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And what bothers me is that Israel sealed off the Allenby crossing as of now, but probably after 2, 3, 4 days, they're going to reopen it again, and the trucks are going to line up once again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the crossing is sealed. It's sealed for humanitarian aid, but you know what happens, right? So then they cut off the humanitarian aid.
Then
the international community turns around and says that you're not allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza because of this one little episode over here. Now you're not allowing humanitarian aid to go in, and you're creating starvation. It's amazing. Also, you see how these claims, they pick up and then they cool off, right? So a few weeks ago, everybody was talking about starvation in Gaza, and then the New York Times puts those pictures of the kids with cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy, and other papers doing that, showing the starvation in Gaza. And Israel points it out, and they point out all the tons of humanitarian aid that are going into Gaza. And now people are not talking as much about starvation in the Gaza Strip, but the narrative sticks. Right, so everybody knows Israel's committing a genocide. Israel's committing starvation. Israel wants to commit ethnic cleansing. All this stage has been set. You see it in every area. I mean, just in this entire week, you see how, in this week's episode, we just see how every area is operating against Israel, and Israel does not have the answers, for all of these different. Every time they come up with an answer, why is Israel the one delivering humanitarian aid? Because they want to check what's going in, right? Yeah, that's the reason why they do it. So, Israel tries to come up with an answer, and then the international community, in cahoots with the Palestinians and Hamas, they find a way to, either to sabotage it on the one, or to create a narrative around Israel that harms Israel on the other side.
I just want to stress one of those murdered 68-year-old Yitzhak Harush. I mean, he's 68. He was still doing reserve duty. I heard an interview with a family member on the radio on the morning he was murdered, and I think it was his wife. And she said something like, I've been saying for years, it's time for you to hang up your uniform. You're 68, and he wouldn't have it. He said, absolutely not. I'm never taking off this uniform. So just a horrible, murderous attack there the other day. Turning to Judea and Samaria, this is, I think, something that we should all be concerned about. This. For the first time, we have seen terrorists in Arab villages just outside of Ramallah, it's just north of Jerusalem, fire test rockets towards Israeli communities. The IDF actually went in and arrested a rocket firing cell, found a bunch of rockets without warheads, explosives, explosive materials, all this rocket manufacturing gear. And this could be a unbelievable game changer, I would say, if Arabs in these villages are able not only to fire on communities in Judea and Samaria, but fire rockets from Judea and Samaria into Jerusalem, into Netanya, into those cities close to the so-called, I don't use the word, but the so-called Green Line. This is very frightening, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, look at Ben Gurion Airport. Okay, Ben Gurion Airport is less than a mile away from the security barrier, and there are Palestinian communities like right on the other side of that barrier that are not governed or administered by the state of Israel. So, if you have rocket capacity and you're less than a mile away from Israel's international airport, you can shutter the airport. You can shoot down a plane. You can hit the terminals. Okay, you can fire rockets on cities, and the distances are so close that there's no Iron Dome, right? Like if you're just firing something like less than a mile, it gives no time for any kind of Israeli counter defense, any anti-rocket system to shoot it down. So just another development, and you see that the Palestinians are trying to encircle Israel and push closer and push closer and push closer. So they're shooting from far in Yemen and from Iran. They're shooting from close in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah. They're shooting from the Gaza Strip. And now they're trying to gear up and figure out whether they can shoot from, just outside Jerusalem, just outside Tel Aviv, Netanya, just outside the airport. But what makes this, a little bit easier for Israel is that Israel does operate in these areas. So even though they don't administer the areas, when they do get intelligence, and there is intelligence, they move in. They do these limited counterterrorism operations. And fortunately, they found these rockets before they were fired.
And that's the difference between Judea and Samaria and Gaza. When Israel got out of Gaza in 2005, during the expulsion, no soldiers were left, no communities were left, so there wasn't a daily monitoring. That's how Hamas was able to build these tunnels all these years. And in this case, as you said, in Judea and Samaria, the IDF can go into the villages and thwart these attacks, but it's very scary stuff. They fired 5,000 mortars between 2000 and 2005 from Gaza into the sparsely populated communities of Gush Katif. And as you said, this is the heart of the Israeli population center. 75% of the population lives there. So something we really have to pay attention to if they start launching rockets at Tel Aviv from Judea and Samaria. Turning gears here to something that was, potentially or possibly a top story here this week. Comments made by Prime Minister Netanyahu hinting that the Jewish state Israel is increasingly being isolated in the world community. Israel needs to become self-reliant. He said that Israel needs to morph into Athens and Super Sparta. Those are his words. In the coming years, having to deal with all these attempts to isolate the Jewish state. I saw a lot of op-eds in the Friday paper talking about Israel and the prime minister's comments in becoming this Super Sparta. What's your take on it?
Well, a lot of Israelis, turned hard on Netanyahu when he made those statements because they believe that Israel should not be an isolated economy. They don't want Israel to be an isolated economy. Israel is, on one hand, an emerging superpower, but it's very small. And if the entire global economy turns off the flow of monies and funding and weapons to Israel, how is Israel going to make it? But at the same time, you have to become self-reliant. And I think that that's really important, that you don't have to be isolated. You should be importing and exporting as much as you can. At the same time, if for whatever reason the international community turns off the spigot, okay, and that can happen for a number of reasons. It might happen intentionally because countries want to embargo, boycott Israel. It can also happen, as we saw during COVID, that there could be other reasons why international trade supply chains get suspended. And what you need to make sure is that Israel is completely self-sufficient. What does that mean, self-sufficient? First of all, food self-sufficient. You have to be growing enough food in the country to feed all the residents of the state of Israel. Again, you can import any food you want. You can export as much food as other people will buy. But if for whatever reason the gates are closed and trade stops, you have to be able to feed the society with the food that you're already growing. So that's really important. Number two, energy independent. We have gas off the coast of the Mediterranean, and we've been trying to cut commercial deals to sell natural gas to Egypt, to sell natural gas to Jordan, to figure out how we could export natural gas to Europe. I mean, on the one hand, I understand it because the commercial companies that helped Israel exploit the natural gas, Noble Energy, others, they want to see their investments recouped as fast as possible. And the only way that those are recouped quickly is if you're selling large quantities of gas abroad. But Israel has to think strategically, and they have to understand that you need to have energy to power the state of Israel for a long time. And specifically, when you look at where we are today with AI, with quantum computing, it takes immense amounts of energy that countries never really planned for. I mean, AI demands the consumption of much more energy. So that this energy is actually precious to Israel, and Israel should think twice about whether it really wants to be, exporting it. And then the last thing, of course, in terms of, I mean, there might be more, but the next really important component of being independent is arms independent. You have to be able to manufacture, produce all of the anti-rocket technology, the Iron Dome, the Arrow, the David Sling. Part of what we're seeing now with, and this was a major news story also, could have been in this week, is that the laser Iron Dome is going online this week as fully operational system to shoot down the Qassam rockets, the short-range rockets. And that's amazing, because what that means is that you no longer have to reload the systems, so the systems don't get overloaded if many rockets are being fired at one time. But because you don't have to reload them, that means you don't have to manufacture them. Okay, it means all it takes is a little bit of energy, and you're able to shoot as many lasers and shoot down as many rockets as are being fired. So you don't have to manufacture these things. But even the offensive weapons, part of the reason this war has taken so long is because Israel did not have stockpiles of the weapons that it needs to fight a war. And Israel, and quite frankly, needs to have in its stockhouses and the warehouses enough missiles to fight as many wars as it could ever need to fight, and certainly to have the manufacturing capability within the country that if you did need more, that you are able to quickly ramp up that capacity. So you have to be food independent, you have to be energy independent, you have to be arms independent, to deal with arms embargoes, to deal with the economic boycotts. And while people in Israel find it very disturbing that that's the case, and I think that what Netanyahu said, unfortunately, is correct. So you have to work diplomatically to open up the channels, make sure that you can take care of yourself inside the country.
Alex, switching gears here, last week we talked about the horrible murder of Charlie Kirk, friend of Israel, and now you have what I would call the anti-Semitic right, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, and others.
Yeah, J.P. Sears.
J.P. Sears with these conspiracy theories that essentially Israel was behind the murder of Charlie Kirk, somehow was involved with this Tyler Robinson, the person who has been arrested. Prime Minister Netanyahu making a video, I think he shared it on X, saying that it's, absolutely Nazi-style propaganda, accusing Israel of murdering Charlie Kirk. And they're just going on and on and on. Candace Owens and all these others using their platforms to bash the state of Israel, like behind it or something.
I mean, to be more accurate, I mean, Owens, Carlson, J.P. Sears, even Fuentes, they've not said that Israel's behind the murder. Quite the opposite. They're saying, we have not seen any evidence that Israel is behind the murder, right? They're not saying, like, let's stop talking about Israel, but they are talking about Israel. It's actually comical, because the one who came out against Candace and Tucker and others was Nick Fuentes, saying, like, they didn't do this one, okay? They might have done other conspiracies, but they're not behind this, so why are you constantly talking about Israel and throwing that in? Because he's worried that if people are saying that Israel's involved in the conspiracy of killing Charlie Kirk and it's actually not true, then maybe you're not gonna believe that Israel's involved in other conspiracies, which he wants you to believe. But what they are doing, and this is something that's really, really interesting and dangerous, is that they are turning on Netanyahu for supposedly injecting himself into the conversation, because Netanyahu came out very early after Charlie Kirk's murder and said that Israel mourns the passing of a true supporter of the state of Israel. And as we said on this program, Charlie Kirk came to Israel a few times. He said that the best trip he ever had was his trip to Israel. He said the second best trip he ever had was his trip to Israel. And he, even in the last couple of weeks before his death, he said anybody who supports Hamas is deranged. I mean, he's been with the state of Israel, even if he questions, if the war is going on too long, whether, the United States should be involved in taking out the nuclear facilities in Iran. And those are good questions. You can have them, but on the fundamental level, Charlie Kirk was with Israel. So now that Charlie Kirk has been killed, there's a war taking place on the ground for who will take control of Turning Point. And what that means is that they understand that, you know, the pro-Israel forces want to make sure that whoever takes over Turning Point will maintain Charlie's legacy as being pro-Israel. And it's a good opportunity to make sure that the MAGA community out there recognizes the benefits of the America-Israel relationship. But the Tucker Carlson, possibly J.D. Vance. I mean, I think it's very interesting to watch where J.D. Vance is on this. It's interesting to watch where Megyn Kelly is on this. Candace, who, by the way, from everything that I've heard, you know, she was totally on the outs with Charlie Kirk and with Turning Point, and she hadn't been involved in any of she hadn't been interviewed on Turning Point in a long time, but now, you know, she's trying to push her way back in, and what they want to do is to make sure that Turning Point USA is part of this MAGA camp that is isolationist and anti-Israel. So you see this battle, and it even though they're not necessarily accusing Israel of being behind the murder, they still make everything about Israel. And the Charlie Kirk murder was not about Israel. It had nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with it. But here you see that they constantly make everything about Israel, as if Israel is the one pulling all the strings, that even when Israel didn't murder Charlie Kirk, which why would they do that? You know, it's mind-blowing. It's really mind-blowing how, you know, the American right is turning so hard on Israel and what their agenda is. But to see this American right being lost, it's also very troubling to Israel, because just a couple of years ago, Israel thought, well, at least we have the American right.
Right, very disturbing, no doubt. And Alex, we are headed towards Rosh Hashanah here in Israel and across the Jewish world. A new year is upon us. And there was a study which was put out this week asking, is the mood in Israel good? Is it poor? And according to this report, the August 2025 Israeli Voice Index by the Israel Democracy Institute, it says that 71% of the public believes the national mood is fairly poor or very poor, with more Jewish Israelis, 73%, holding this view than Arab citizens, 58%. So the first thing that struck me when I read this was the fact that the 2025 World Happiness Report had Israel as the 8th happiest country in the world. So these are contradictory, in my opinion. How, on one hand, do the majority of Israelis say the situation or the mood here is poor or fair to poor? And on the other hand, you have Israel being the eighth happiest country in the world. I don't get the contradictions here. You have to remember, though, this is this is put out by the Israel Democracy Institute, so they definitely have an agenda as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Israel Democracy Institute is a left-wing organization that has been anti-government. They were against the judicial reforms. They're against Prime Minister Netanyahu. They're against the religious sectors of the society here. And what they want to do is they want to convince the Israeli public that the mood is poor, and that the reason why the mood is poor is because of the Israeli leadership. But, you know, when you said fair to poor, so that could mean that maybe it's fair. What you do see in some of the patterns of the questioning is that the secular left in Israel is much more pessimistic about where the country is than the religious right. That religious people in general are very optimistic about the country compared to the secular. You know, those that voted for the government are much less pessimistic about where the country is than those that voted against the government. And it's amazing that even, like you said, that that the Arab citizens of Israel, you know, they're not ultimately as pessimistic as some of these like left-wing Israelis. You know, I think that there's a lot of reasons why the mood here can be poor, and especially a lot of what we were talking about this week. Israelis do feel more and more isolated. We're still dealing with the pain and the heartache of October 7th and all of the soldiers that we've lost in the war. You know, all of the small businesses that have been closed because of soldiers, you know, being in Gaza for so long, being unable to continue their businesses and to cultivate their businesses. You know, there's a lot of reasons why things could be poor. At the same time, people need to be reminded of what Israel's actually accomplished this year. I mean, threat of a nuclear Iran has been completely neutralized. And nobody understood how or when that was ever going to happen, but that happened. Hezbollah is no longer a threat to Israel. I mean, it was believed that Hezbollah could destroy Israel, but Israel succeeded in reducing the weapons capacity of Hezbollah by about 75%, and pushing Hezbollah, north of the Litani River, away from the border. So, that was a major success. The entirety of Syria has been demilitarized. Hamas no longer poses a threat to the home front of Israel. They barely have any rockets left. They cannot do any more cross-border movements. Israel's taken out, is basically destroyed Hamas, Hezbollah, the Syrian army, and Iran in what's been unbelievable military victories. So I think that there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but when you want to turn public opinion against the prime minister, what you do is you come out with these polls that show that the national mood is poor, and other things, and that's what we're seeing. So, we talked a lot about the external enemies, but there are internal enemies as well. Inside Israel, I just saw some kind of a video clip, of these like angry left-wing, secular, older. A lot of the times the people that are protesting are older, and they're saying that they trust Hamas more than the prime minister of Israel, that Hamas has been basically begging Israel to take its hostages back. It's just that the prime minister of Israel is rejecting the deal for whatever reason. So you see here that there are Israelis that have lost the plot, and even though the situation is difficult, I think that you and I know, and we've been to, I'm sure you've been to weddings and bar mitzvahs and other celebrations. Israelis, even in the darkest times, celebrate life. They are fighting because they believe in something. They're proud of what they believe in and are willing to fight for that. If people were really, really upset about the status of Israel and the future of Israel, they wouldn't be fighting for it, okay? They would give up on the fight, but they're actually fighting for something very strong, very beautiful that they believe in. That's why Israelis fight. So, I think that the mood is not as bad. Of course, I do recognize that there are a lot of forces within Israel that are trying to make everybody be in a bad mood.
Certainly, Alex, as we head to the year 5786, let's pray that we have a good, sweet new year, both here in Israel and around the world, and everyone out there at home should have a wonderful year ahead. Let's hope that Israel achieves all of its military goals as soon as possible, that we only hear good news on all fronts, that God continues to protect our brave men and women of the IDF, protecting us 24/7 on so many different fronts. What are your wishes for the new year to those who are viewing?
Well, Rosh Hashanah is a very, very important day on the calendar. It's the Jewish New Year. It's a day of judgment. It commemorates the day in which Adam, the first man, and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden. And it is a day of judgment. The entire world stands in judgment. All of mankind stands in judgment before the King on this day, on Rosh Hashanah. And Israel does the work on behalf of all mankind to be praying for good judgments for ourselves, for our nation, but for the entire world, for that matter. And another important element of this day is what we call the coronation of the king, that we retake upon ourselves God's preeminent dominance over the entire world. We recognize that the kingship is a major portion of the prayer. And if you look at what's going on today, and specifically you look at anti-Semitism, I think that there's and it puts a lot of pressure on Israel. And I think that there are certain things that you need to look at and consider, especially on Rosh Hashanah. Anti-Semitism, what it does is it unites Jews. Why does it unite Jews? It unites Jews because the enemies of the Jewish people, they don't see any distinctions between Jews. But we know that in the holiday season before October 7th, there was a lot of discord in Israel. There continues to be a lot of domestic discord with different groups, saying, you're not a good Jew. You don't know how to be a good Jew. You, Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, you don't serve in the army. You religious, you're not good Jews. You're the bad type of Jew. The enemies of the Jewish people, they do not distinguish between what's a good Jew and what's a bad Jew. To them, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. So, with anti-Semitism, what God is looking for is for the Jewish people to say, hey, maybe we need to unite to fight our common enemies. So it's, God is on the spiritual level giving us a message that we need to unite ourselves, because when we unite, we're strong and we can defeat any enemies. The second thing is, when all these other countries, France, UK, Democrats, MAGA right, when they turn against Israel, Israelis are looking around and saying, where's our friends? Who can we turn to? And when you look around and you see there's nobody else you can turn to, where do you look? You look up. And I think that this is really the message that God wants from us on this Rosh Hashanah, which is to turn to the King, to turn to our Father, to say, God, we don't have anybody left. All we have is you. That's what God wants us to say the whole time. Now, he would want us to say that without having all the other nations of the world turn on us. But if we refuse to see the signs and to recognize that all the miracles that we've had in these last 2 years in this war, I mean, with Iran firing all these ballistic missiles, Houthis firing all these ballistic missiles, how many people have died as a result of these missiles? There have been deaths, but when you think about how many people could have been killed, how many people could have been killed on October 7th, how many people could have been killed if Hezbollah would have joined in the war on October 7th and attacked us from the north. God's been protecting us this whole time, and what God really wants from us on Rosh Hashanah is to turn to him and, number one, to say thank you for protecting us. Thank you for giving us the strength to have all these military victories. And the only force that we have to turn to, God, is you. That's what God wants from us on Rosh Hashanah. And so it's my blessing that, recognizing the power of Jewish unity, recognizing the kingship of God, and that our fate is ultimately in his hands, that we will secure powerful and positive judgments for ourselves personally, for our families, for our nation, specifically for all the supporters of Israel around the world, those that are listening to this program, but even for all of mankind, because quite frankly, the world needs our spiritual work in order to improve the situation around the world.
Amen to all that. Alex, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
And Shana Tova to everyone out there. I want to thank our team behind the scenes here, producer Esther Eden, Yuri Svertsky, Ryan Lishitz, and Zach Sickerman. Have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah for those who are celebrating, and happy 5786. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem the
See
Net.
you next year.
See you next year.